It is a Tuesday evening, sometime in October. The house has finally gone quiet. The dishes are done. The television is off. You have settled into the one chair that feels right, and for about 4 minutes, nothing in the house is asking you for anything. Then you stand up to turn off the hall light, and there it is. That one board. Right at the bedroom doorway, right where your heel lands every single time. A high, dry little squeal that sounds louder at night than it has any right to. You pause. You step on it again just to be sure. Same spot. Same sound. Same board that has been telling on you every time you get up after dark. Now, if you do what most people do next, you look it up. And the moment you look it up, somebody is quoting you a number. Hardwood floor repair, $480 on the low end, $1,700 on the high end, pulling boards, matching stain, hidden fasteners, maybe a whole section of the hallway, for one creak, for one board that was perfectly fine last spring. And here is the part that should bother you but probably never has. There is another way to start. It has been sitting on a shelf at the nearest pharmacy or dollar store for as long as any of those stores have been open. It costs about $2. It takes about 5 minutes. And the reason nobody ever taught you to try it first is the plainest reason there is. There is no money in teaching you the cheap thing. There is a great deal of money in skipping straight to the estimate. That does not make the estimate dishonest. Sometimes the floor really does need serious work. But the first step, the one that handles the squeak when the problem is just two dry boards rubbing at the seam, that step costs less than a cup of gas station coffee. And it is the step that got lost. Not hidden. Not suppressed. Just never worth anybody's time to pass along because you cannot build a business on a $2 fix. By the end of this video, you will know that step. You will know what to buy, what it costs today, how to do it exactly right, and how to tell whether it is the right fix or whether your floor needs something bigger. And you will have the honest answer before you have a bill. I want to be straight with you before I go any further with this. The modern answer to a squeaky floorboard is to call somebody. And I'm not here to tell you that calling somebody is always wrong, because sometimes it is exactly right. But the version of the story you have been handed, the one where every creak in a hardwood floor means pulling planks, matching stain, hiring a contractor, and writing a check somewhere between $500 and $1,700, that version skips a step. It skips the first step. And the first step for a certain kind of squeak is a dry powder that costs less than a drive-through lunch. That is not a gimmick. That is not an internet trick somebody made up last Tuesday. That is an old, quiet, well-documented first-line repair that works when two finished boards are rubbing against each other at the seam. Current guidance from this old house, Better Homes and Gardens, and the American Hardwood Information Center all say the same thing. Try a dry lubricant in the joint before you do anything invasive. And the reason you were never taught to start there is plain. Nobody gets paid to tell you to try the cheap thing first. So here is what I am going to do. By the end of this video, you will know exactly how to tell whether your squeak is the kind this fixes. You will know what powder to use, what it costs today at the store nearest you, how to apply it step by step, and what result to expect by tonight. And you will know, just as important, when to stop fooling with powder and move on to screws, shims, or a professional. I am going to be honest about all of it, because that is the only version worth your time. My name is Hal, and I grew up in a house where you did not replace a thing until you had first understood why it failed. My father was the kind of man who listened to a sound before he reached for a tool. He would put his hand flat on a floorboard the way a doctor puts a hand on a chest, not to fix it yet, just to feel what was moving. My mother was the other half of that same discipline. She kept a short legal pad in the kitchen drawer, and before any household dollar got spent, the small number went on that pad first. The cheap, honest try. The ordinary repair. The thing you could do with what you already had in the house. If that did not work, then you moved to the next line. But you never started at the expensive end. You earned your way there by ruling out the simple answer first. That is the way I was raised, and that is the way I still work. Not because I am cheap, because I respect the old sequence. Understand the problem, try the least destructive, honest fix, and only escalate when the small fix tells you it is not enough. Now, before I show you what to do, you need to understand why a hardwood floor squeaks in the first place, because that tells you what to expect from this fix and, just as important, what not to expect. Wood is hygroscopic. That is a word that sounds technical, but it means something simple. Wood takes on moisture when the air is humid and gives it off when the air is dry. Your hardwood floor is doing this right now, whether you hear it or not. As the seasons turn, as the furnace dries the house in winter and the summer pushes humidity back in, those boards swell and shrink. Not a lot, not enough to see most days, but enough to move. That movement does three things. It can make boards rub against each other at the seams, it can let nails loosen slightly in their holes, and it can allow the subfloor underneath to shift against the joists or the fasteners holding everything together. The sound you hear, that creak, that squeal, that dry little complaint, is friction plus movement. That part is not mysterious at all. Now here is the distinction that matters, and I need you to hold on to it because it is the whole difference between a $2 evening and a phone call to a contractor. The powder fix I am about to show you is for the squeak that lives right at the seam. Two finished boards rubbing where the surfaces are dry. A board and a fastener near the top, complaining because there is nothing slick between them anymore. A dry powder worked into that joint reduces the friction, and when the friction goes quiet, the squeak goes with it. That is the mechanism. That is why soapstone, talcum powder, graphite, and plain cornstarch baby powder all show up in reputable flooring guides as a first try. They are dry lubricants. They coat the surfaces where the rubbing happens, and they do it without wetting the wood, without staining the finish, and without requiring you to pull up a single board. But if the squeak is coming from below, from a loose nail, from the subfloor flexing, from a gap between a joist and the underside of the floor, from structure that is actually moving, powder does not reach the true problem. You can pour a whole bottle of baby powder into that seam, and the noise will still be there tomorrow, because the friction is not where you are treating it. That squeak needs screws, or shims, or adhesive, or bracing from underneath. That is a different repair, and I will tell you exactly when to make that call before we are done here. What to expect if this is the right squeak. Relief can be immediate, and the whole job can take 5 minutes. What not to expect, this is not a structural repair. It is not a cure for bounce or softness. And it is not a guarantee against seasonal movement, bringing the noise back eventually. Better Homes and Gardens phrases powdered lubrication as a quick fix, with graphite as the ideal dry lubricant and baby powder as something that can sometimes do the trick. That word, sometimes, is important. It is the honest part. And I would rather give you the honest part now than have you come back disappointed later. If you want more of these old cheap fixes before somebody talks you into a big bill, subscribe right now. I put one of these out every week, and every single one follows the same rule. Try the least expensive honest repair first. That is all I ask. Now let me show you exactly how to do this. Here is what you need, and I am going to put a price on everything so there is no mystery. Your material is a dry powder lubricant. I am going to give you the options honestly, cheapest first. If you want the lowest cost version, a store brand cornstarch baby powder will do the job. Parent's Choice. Pure cornstarch baby powder, 15 ounces, is $1.98 at Walmart. Dollar Tree carries Arm & Hammer talc-free body powder for $1.25. Target store brand, Up & Up, 22 ounces, runs $2.99. Johnson's cornstarch baby powder, 9 ounces, is $3.99. Any of those will work. They are dry, fine-grained, and they will not stain a finished floor. If you want the version that comes from the tool room instead of the bathroom, powdered graphite is what Better Homes and Gardens calls the ideal powdered lubricant for tongue and groove squeaks. A GS graphite lubricant runs $2.79 for a small bottle at Ace Hardware, or $6.99 for the larger size. Graphite has the advantage of being completely inert and staying dry permanently. It will not cake, it will not mold, and it will not attract moisture. You may also want a pointed tip squeeze bottle. This is optional, not mandatory. This old house suggests reusing a clean hair dye squeeze bottle if you have one in the house. If not, small pointed applicator bottles run a couple of dollars online, but you can also just sprinkle and brush. The bottle makes it neater. That is all. What you do not want: anything wet, no oil, no WD-40, no cooking spray, no silicone squirted into the seam. The reputable guidance for a topside treatment on finished hardwood is specifically dry powder or a wood-safe dry lubricant. Wet products can stain the finish, swell the wood, attract dirt into the joint, and make things worse. If someone on the internet told you to pour oil into your hardwood floor, that person was not thinking about your floor 6 months from now. Now do this exactly, in order. Step 1. Find the exact board, not the general area. Have somebody walk slowly over the squeaky spot while you get down close and listen. You are trying to locate the precise seam, the exact joint line between two boards that makes the sound. Mark it with a small piece of painter's tape so you do not lose it. If the noise is not at one seam but seems to travel across a wide patch, moving around as the person walks, that already tells you something. You may be dealing with a below-surface issue, not a rubbing seam. Note that and keep going, but know that the powder may not be your answer. Step 2. Give the floor a quick diagnosis before you pour anything. Press the area with your hand. Stand on it and shift your weight. Does the floor feel solid? Does the squeak happen when two boards move against each other at one joint? Is the area level, not sinking? If yes, powder is a fair first try. But if that spot feels soft, if there is bounce when you step on it, if the gap between boards is wide and growing, or if you can get below the floor and see daylight between the subfloor and the joists, stop calling this a powder job. That is a structural issue. Powder will not reach it, and your money is better spent on a professional assessment. Step 3. Clean the seam dry. Take a clean, dry cloth and wipe the area so you are not working yesterday's dust and grit into the crack. The goal is simple. You want the lubricant going into the seam, not into dirt. Step 4. Apply the powder directly into the crack. If you have a squeeze bottle, load it with your powder and inject it straight between the boards. Aim for the joint line. If you do not have a bottle, sprinkle the powder over the seam and use a soft brush or an old cloth to work it toward the crack. Start light. You want enough to coat that squeaky joint, not enough to turn your hallway into a winter scene. A thin, even line along the seam is what you are after. Step 5. Work it in with pressure. Lay a towel or cloth over the treated area and step on it. Walk over it several times. Shift your weight back and forth across the seam. What you are doing is using your own body weight to push the powder down into the joint, right where the two boards meet and rub. The American Hardwood Information Center says to cover and step. Better Homes and Gardens says to brush the powder back and forth, step repeatedly, then add more until the crack stops accepting it. That is the goal. Drive the lubricant into the space where the friction lives. Step 6. If the squeak is quieter but not gone, do it again. 1 or 2 additional applications may be necessary, so do not judge after the very first dusting if things are better but not silent. Give it a second honest try with a little more powder worked in. The threshold is 1 or 2 serious attempts, not 6 hopeful ones. Step 7. Clean the surface, but do not vacuum the seam. This is the part most people get wrong. They finally get the lubricant where it needs to go, and then they run a vacuum right over the crack and pull it all back out. Better Homes and Gardens says to wipe the remaining surface residue with a damp cloth, but do not vacuum the area. The powder in the seam is doing its job. The powder on the surface is what you clean up. Step 8. Judge the result by the end of the day. Walk over the spot in the evening. Step on it the way you normally would. If the squeak is gone or sharply reduced, you likely had a surface friction problem and you solved the right thing for under $3. If it is unchanged, if you did 2 proper applications and the noise did not move, this old house is blunt about what that means. The squeak likely originates below the surface. That is your signal to stop dusting and start thinking about the next level of repair, not your invitation to keep pouring more powder in forever. And that matters, so let me say it plainly. The wrong approach, the one that floats around certain corners of the internet, is treating every squeaky floor as a powder floor. A rubbing seam and a loose floor are not the same repair. If the noise is coming from subfloor movement, raised nails, joist gaps, settlement, termite damage, or water damage, the powder is not a miracle, you just have not applied hard enough. It is the wrong tool for that problem. Knowing when to stop is part of knowing how to fix things. Now, the heritage of this, I want to be careful here because I think you deserve the truth more than a good story. The principle of working a dry lubricant into a squeaky hardwood seam is genuinely old. It shows up in current old house repair guidance, and it shows up with the kind of specificity that tells you it has been passed down for a long time. Soapstone, talcum powder, graphite, plain dry starch. These are not things somebody invented for a website. They are materials that were on hand in ordinary households for generations. What I will not do is give you a neat little tale about Depression-era families buying talcum powder specifically for their floors because I cannot verify that as a documented historical practice, and I am not going to invent one. What I can tell you is this: the principle is old. The idea that you try a dry, cheap, non-invasive fix on a finished floor before you do anything destructive, that is the handyman discipline of people who could not afford to get it wrong. The exact powder may have varied by household, by region, by era. But the logic did not change. You do not tear up what you can quiet down. You do not replace what you can maintain. That is not a new idea. You are recovering it. For keeping this fix working over time, the single most useful thing you can do is keep your indoor humidity steadier than the house would manage on its own. The commonly cited target range for wood floors is around 30 to 50% relative humidity, with room temperature roughly 60 to 80 degrees Fahrenheit. That does not make a house silent, but it reduces the seasonal swelling and shrinking cycle that opens seams and loosens fasteners in the first place. When a new squeak shows up, test it early. Do not wait until movement gets worse or the noise spreads. A spot that returns every dry season may just need humidity management and another light powder treatment. A spot that gets louder, that feels softer underfoot, that starts to spread, that one is asking for a deeper look, and the sooner you give it one, the less it costs. If you want a number on prevention, a basic indoor hygrometer, the little gauge that tells you your humidity, runs about $10 to $14 at Walmart, still cheaper than a single service call, and it tells you what your house is doing before your floor has to complain about it. Now let me be honest about what this does and what it does not do, because you need both. For a localized hardwood seam squeak, 2 boards rubbing at one joint, the dry powder method is a credible, widely supported first-line fix. It is fast, cheap, reversible, and non-invasive. It is especially appealing when the floor is finished hardwood, access from below is limited, and you want to try the least destructive step first. This old house says the basic job takes about 5 minutes, where it works mildly or uncertainly. If the squeak involves a nail rubbing slightly in its hole near the surface, the powder might reach it, might not. If the board is also moving against a fastener deeper down, the surface powder may take the edge off without solving it completely. Where it fails, soft spots, bouncy floors, multiple noise patches across a wide area, visible fastener lift, significant gaps you can see under the floor, sagging joists, water damage, termite damage, any sign that the structure itself is shifting. Better Homes and Gardens is clear. If you see significant gaps or damage in the floor system, call a professional. Those bigger issues can stem from settlement, termite damage, or water damage, and they are not powder problems. When to call a professional? If one or two proper powder applications change nothing. If the squeak is getting worse quickly, if the floor feels unsafe underfoot, or if you can get below the floor, basement, crawl space, and see gaps or damage between the subfloor and the joists, that is the decision point, and there is no shame in reaching it. The shame would be ignoring it. One more thing before I get to the numbers, and this one matters. The original framing of this fix mentioned pure talcum powder, and I owe you a word on that. The FDA says talc can be contaminated with asbestos and continues testing talc-containing cosmetic products for asbestos contamination. The American Cancer Society says talc that contains asbestos is generally accepted as being able to cause cancer if inhaled, and Medline Plus says talcum powder may be harmful if breathed in. So here is how I handle it and how you should too. Use a dry powder lubricant. Cornstarch-based baby powder or powdered graphite are cleaner choices for this job. Keep the powder low to the floor and away from your face. Do not let children or pets play in the residue. Wipe the surface clean after working the powder into the seam. If you do use a product that contains talc, treat it as a floor lubrication material with an inhalation warning, not as something casual. That keeps the thrift lesson and drops the needless health risk. Here is where it all comes together. You have one repair: a dry powder lubricant, cornstarch baby powder or graphite, worked into a squeaky hardwood seam. It is strong for surface friction squeaks between finished boards. It is mild to uncertain for deeper fastener rub. It does not work for structural movement bounce, subfloor flex, or joist problems. The job takes about 5 minutes. The cost is between $1.25 and $6.99 depending on what you choose. And the test is simple. If 2 proper applications do not quiet the squeak, the problem is deeper than the powder can reach, and it is time to move on. The honest math is plain. On one side, you have a first try that costs between $1.25 and $6.99, a bottle of cornstarch baby powder or a tube of graphite. On the other side, a contractor-level hardwood floor repair visit currently runs about $480 to $1,700 on average, depending on severity. Now, I am not going to stand here and tell you that $2 replaces a $1,700 job, because sometimes the floor genuinely needs that work. But what I will tell you is this: $1.25 to $6.99 first try can save you from a 3-figure or 4-figure bill when the problem turns out to be nothing more than surface friction. And you will not know which kind of problem you have until you try the cheap, honest step first. That is the value. Not the powder itself, the sequence, the willingness to test before you spend. There is no money in teaching you this. Think about that for a moment. Nobody sells you a dry powder lubricant consultation. Nobody runs an ad for the 5-minute squeak repair. There is, on the other hand, real money in flooring estimates, service calls, replacement materials, and labor, and I am not saying that is dishonest. Floors do need real repair, and the people who do that work earn what they charge. But the small fix, the one that might solve the problem for $1 and change, nobody is paid to pass that along. One generation stops teaching the little repair because money gets easier and the noise is just annoying enough to pay someone else to deal with. The next generation thinks the floor problem starts when a contractor says so. Meanwhile, the old first step sits quiet in a bottle that costs less than your morning coffee on a shelf at the nearest dollar store. That is not a conspiracy. That is just how small knowledge disappears when nobody has a reason to keep it alive. And that is really what this comes down to if you step back far enough. It was never just about a squeak. It is about whether every small irritation in a house becomes a paid event or whether you know the order of operations. Cheap, honest test first. Invasive repair second. Replacement last. That is not stinginess. That is not false thrift. That is the discipline of solving the problem at the level where it actually lives and having the sense to move up only when the small fix tells you to. A home that works this way is a home that belongs to you, not to the store, not to the service plan, not to whoever answers the phone when you call in a panic about a noise. To you. Here is what I want you to do. Tonight, find one squeak. Step on it. Press it. Decide whether it is a seam squeak, two boards rubbing at one joint, or a movement squeak, where the floor itself feels like it is shifting. That decision alone is worth your time. This week, if it is a seam squeak, do one proper dry powder application. Work it in the way I showed you. Judge it by the evening. That costs you under $3 in 5 minutes. This month, pick up a hygrometer, $10 to $14, and put it where you can see it. Learn what your house does in dry weather and in damp weather. That one number, relative humidity, tells you more about why your floors creak than most contractor visits will. This season, if the squeak keeps returning, or if it spreads, or if the floor gets softer, inspect from below if you can, or price the deeper fix before damage compounds. The sequence saves you money at every step because you never skip ahead of what you actually know. Now I have 2 questions for you, and I read every single one of these. First, what spot in your house squeaks the loudest? Hallway, stairs, bedroom doorway, or that one board right where everybody steps? Tell me. Second, if your father or grandfather had an old repair trick for quieting a house without tearing it apart, put it in the comments. Those are the first bits of household knowledge that disappear, and sometimes the only way to save them is for somebody to write them down where other people can find them. If you are not subscribed, now is a good time. Same principle next week, different problem. The cheap first fix for sticky doors and windows when the seasons move the house. Same logic, old knowledge, low cost, honest scope. I will see you there. Until then, find the squeak, try the powder, trust the sequence, and only spend the big money when the small money tells you it is time. That is how it is still done in any home that remembers.